Search of America by John Steinbeck. Born in Salinas, California in 1902, John Steinbeck grew up in a fertile agricultural valley about 25 miles from the Pacific coast, and both valley and coast would serve as settings for some of his best fiction. In 1919, he went to Stanford University, where he intermittently enrolled in literature and writing courses until he left in 1925 without taking a degree. During the next 5 years, he supported himself as a laborer and journalist in New York City, all the time working on his first novel, Cup of Gold, published in 1929. After marriage and a move to Pacific Grove, he published 2 California fictions, The Pastures of Haven in 1932 and To a God Unknown in 1933, and worked on short stories later collected in The Long Valley, published in 1938. Popular successes and financial security came only with Tortilla Flat in 1935, stories about Montgomery's Paseanos. A ceaseless experimenter throughout his career, Steinbeck changed courses regularly. 3 powerful novels of the late 1930s focused on the California laboring class: In Dubious Battle from 1936, Of Mice and Men from 1937, and the book considered by many his finest, The Grapes of Wrath from 1939. Early in the 1940s, Steinbeck became a filmmaker with The Forgotten Village in 1941, and a serious student of marine biology with Sea of Cortez, also in 1941. He devoted his services to the war, writing Bombs Away in 1942, and the controversial play novelette The Moon is Down, also in 1942. Canary Row from 1945, The Wayward Bus from 1947, The Pearl from 1947, A Russian Journal from 1948, and other experimental drama Burning Bright from 1950, and The Log from the Sea of Cortez from 1951, preceded publication of the monumental East of Eden in 1952, an ambitious saga of the Salinas Valley and his own family's history. The last decades of his life were spent in New York City and Sag Harbor with his third wife, with whom he traveled widely. Later books include Sweet Thursday from 1954, The Short Reign of Pippin IV, A Fabrication from 1957, Once There Was a War from 1958, The Winter of Our Discontent from 1961, Travels with Charley in Search of America, 1962, America and Americans, 1966, and the posthumously published Journal of a Novel, The East of Eden Letters, 1969, Viva Zapata, 1975, The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights, 1976, and Working Days, The Journals of the Grapes of Wrath, in 1989. He died in 1968, having won a Nobel Prize in 1962. The book begins with a map of John Steinbeck's travels with Charley, showing all the places he and Charley went. Part 1. When I was very young and the urge to be someplace else was on me, I was assured by mature people that maturity would cure this itch. When years described me as mature, the remedy prescribed was middle age. In middle age, I was assured that greater age would calm my fever, and now that I am 58, perhaps senility will do the job. Nothing has worked. 4 hoarse blasts of a ship's whistle still raise the hair on my neck and set my feet to tapping. The sound of a jet, an engine warming up, even the clopping of shod hooves on pavement brings on the ancient shudder, the dry mouth and vacant eye, the hot palms and the churn of stomach high up under the rib cage. In other words, I don't improve. In further words, once a bum, always a bum. I fear the disease is incurable. I set this matter down, not to instruct others, but to inform myself. When the virus of relentlessness begins to take possession of a wayward man, and the road away from here seems broad and straight and sweet, the victim must first find himself in good and sufficient reason for going. This is to the practical bum is not difficult. He has a built-in garden of reasons to choose from. Next, he must plan his trip in time and space, choose a direction and a destination. And last, he must implement the journey: how to go, what to take, how long to stay. This part of the process is invariable and immortal. I set it down only so that newcomers to bumdom, like teenagers in the new hatched sin, will not think they invented it. Once a journey is designed, equipped, and put in a process, a new factor enters and takes over. A trip, a safari, an exploration is an entity, different from all other journeys. It has personality, temperament, individuality, uniqueness. A journey is a person in itself. No two are alike. And all plans, safeguards, policing, and coercion are fruitless. We find after years of struggle that we do not take a trip. A trip takes us. Tour masters, schedules, reservations, brass bound and inevitable, dash themselves to wreckage on the personality of the trip. Only when this is recognized can the blown in the grass bum relax and go along with it. Only then do the frustrations fall away. In this, a journey is like a marriage. The certain way to be wrong is to think you control it. I feel better now, having said this, although only those who have experienced it will understand it. My plan was clear, concise, and reasonable, I think. For many years, I have traveled in many parts of the world. In America, I live in New York, or dip into Chicago or San Francisco. But New York is no more America than Paris is France, or London is England. Thus, I discovered that I did not know my own country. I, an American writer, writing about America, was working from memory, and the memory is at best a faulty, warpy reservoir. I had not heard the speech of America, smelled the grass and trees and sewage, seen its hills and water, its color and quality of light, but I knew the changes only from books and newspapers. But more than this, I had not felt the country for 25 years. In short, I was writing of something I did not know about, and it seems to me that in a so-called writer this is criminal. My memories were distorted by 25 intervening years. Once I traveled about in an old bakery wagon, double-doored rattler with a mattress on its floor. I stopped where people stopped or gathered. I listened and looked and felt, and in the process had a picture of my country, the accuracy of which was impaired only by my own shortcomings. So it was that I determined to look again, to try to rediscover this monster land. Otherwise, in writing, I could not tell the small diagnostic truths which are the foundations of the larger truth. One sharp difficulty presented itself. In the intervening 25 years, my name had become reasonably well known, and it has been my experience that when people have heard of you, favorably or not, they change. They become, through shyness or other qualities that publicly inspires, something they are not under ordinary circumstances. This being so, my trip demanded that I leave my name and my identity at home. I had to be peripatetic eyes and ears, a kind of moving gelatin plate. I could not sign hotel registers, meet people I knew, interview others, or even ask searching questions. Furthermore, two or more people disturbed the ecologic complex of an area. I had to go alone, and I had to be self-contained, a kind of casual turtle carrying his house on his back. With all this in mind, I wrote to the head office of a great corporation which manufactures trucks. I specified my purpose and my needs. I wanted a 3/4-ton pickup truck capable of going anywhere under possibly rigorous conditions, and on this truck I wanted a little house built like a cabin of a small boat. A trailer is difficult to maneuver on mountain roads, is impossible and often illegal to park, and is subject to many restrictions. In due time, specifications came through for a tough, fast, comfortable vehicle mounting a camper top, a little house with double bed, a 4-burner stove, a heater, refrigerator, and lights operating on butane, a chemical toilet, closet space, storage space, windows screened against insects, exactly what I had wanted. It was delivered in the summer to my little fishing place at Sag Harbor, near the end of Long Island. Although I didn't want to start before Labor Day when the nation settles back into normal living, I did want to get used to my turtle shell, to equip it and learn it. It arrived in August, a beautiful thing, powerful yet light. It was almost as easy to handle as a passenger car, and because my planned trip had aroused some satiric remarks among my friends, I named it Rocinante, which you will remember was the name of Don Quixote's horse. Since I made no secret of my project, a number of controversies arose among my friends and advisors. A projected journey spawns advisors in schools. I was told that since my photograph was widely distributed as my publisher could make it, I would find it impossible to move without being recognized. Let me say in advance that in over 10,000 miles and in 34 states, I was not recognized even once. I believe that people identify things only in context. Even those people who might have known me against a background I am supposed to have, in no case identified me and Rocinante. I was advised that the name Rocinante, painted on the side of my truck in 16th century Spanish script, would cause curiosity and inquiry in some places. I do not know how many people recognize the name, but surely no one ever asked about it. Next, I was told that a stranger's purpose in moving about the country might cause inquiry or even suspicion. For this reason, I racked a shotgun, 2 rifles, and a couple of fishing rods in my truck. For it's my experience that if a man is going hunting or fishing, his purpose is understood and even applauded. Actually, my hunting days are over. I no longer kill or catch anything I can get into a frying pan. I am too old for sport killing. This stage setting turned out to be unnecessary. It was said that my New York license plates would arouse interest and perhaps questions, since they were the only outward identifying marks I had. And so they did, perhaps 20 or 30 times in the whole trip, but such context followed an invariable pattern somewhat as follows. Local man. New York, huh? Me. Yep. Local man. I was there in 1938, or was it 39? Alice, was it 38 or 39 we went to New York? Alice, it was 36. I remember it because it was the year Alfred died. Local man. Anyway, I hated it. Wouldn't live there if you paid me. There was some genuine worry about my traveling alone, open to attack, robbery, assault. It is well known that our roads are dangerous, and here I admit I had senseless qualms. It is some years since I have been alone, nameless, friendless, without any of the safety one gets from family, friends, accomplices. There is no reality in the danger. It's just a very lonely, helpless feeling at first, a kind of desolate feeling. For this reason, I took one companion on my journey, an old French gentleman poodle known as Charley. Actually, his name was Charles Lechine. He was born in Bercy on the outskirts of Paris and trained in France, and while he knows a little poodle English, he responds quickly only to commands in French. Otherwise, he has to translate, and that slows him down. He's a very big poodle, of a color called blue, and he is blue when he is clean. Charley is a born diplomat. He prefers negotiation to fighting, and properly so, since he is very bad at fighting. Only once in his 10 years has he been in trouble, when he met a dog who refused to negotiate. Charley lost a piece of his right ear that time. But he is a good watchdog, has a roar like a lion, designed to conceal from night-wandering strangers the fact that he couldn't bite his way out of a cornet de papier. He is a good friend and traveling companion, and would rather travel about than anything he can imagine. If he occurs at length in this account, it is because he has contributed much to the trip. A dog, particularly an exotic one like Charley, is a bond between strangers. Many conversations en route begin with, "What degree of a dog is that?" The techniques of opening conversation are universal. I knew long ago and rediscovered that the best way to attract attention, help, and conversation is to be lost. A man who is seeing his mother starving to death on a path kicks her in the stomach to clear the way, will cheerfully devote several hours of his time giving wrong directions to a total stranger who claims to be lost. Under the big oak trees of my place at Sag Harbor sat Rocinante, handsome and self-contained, and neighbors came to visit, some neighbors we didn't even know we had. I saw in their eyes something I was to see over and over in every part of the nation, a burning desire to go, to move, to get underway, any place away from here. They spoke quietly of how they wanted to go, someday, to move about, free and unanchored, not towards something, but away from something. I saw this look and heard this yearning everywhere in every state I visited. Nearly every American hungers to move. One small boy, about 13 years old, came back every day. He stood apart shyly and looked at Rocinante. He peered in the door and even lay on the ground and studied the heavy-duty springs. He was a silent, ubiquitous small boy. He even came at night to stare at Rocinante. After a week, he could stand it no longer. His words wrestled their way hell-bent through his shyness. He said, "If you'll take me with you, why, I'll do anything. I'll cook, I'll wash all the dishes, and do all the work, and I'll take care of you." Unfortunately for me, I knew his longing. "I wish I could," I said, "but the school board and your parents and lots of others say I can't." "I'll do anything," he said, and I believed he would. I don't think he ever gave up until I drove away without him. He had the dream I have had all my life, and there is no cure. Equipping Rocinante was a long and pleasant process. I took far too many things, but I didn't know what I would find. Tools for emergency, tow lines, a small block and tackle, a trenching tool, a crowbar, tools for making and fixing and improvising. Then there were emergency foods. I would be late in the northwest and caught by snow. I prepared for at least a week of emergency. Water was easy. Rocinante carried a 30-gallon tank. I thought I might do some writing along the way. Perhaps essays, surely notes, certainly letters. I took paper, carbon, typewriters, pencils, notebooks, and not only those, but dictionaries, a compact encyclopedia, and a dozen other reference books, heavy ones. I suppose our capacity for self-delusion is boundless. I knew very well that I rarely make notes, and if I do, I either lose them or can't read them. I also knew from 30 years of my profession that I cannot write hot on an event. It has to ferment. I must do what a friend calls mull it over for a time before it goes down. And in spite of this self-knowledge, I equipped Rocinante with enough writing material to take care of 10 volumes. Also, I laid in 150 pounds of those books one hasn't got around to reading, and of course, those are the books one ever isn't going to get around to reading. Canned goods, shotgun shells, rifle cartridges, toolboxes, and far too many clothes, blankets, pillows, and too many shoes and boots, padded nylon Sub-Zero underwear, plastic dishes and cups, and a plastic dishpan, a spare tank of bottled gas. The overloaded springs sighed and settled lower and lower. I judge now that I carried about 4 times too much of everything. Now, Charley is a mind-reading dog. There have been many trips in his lifetime, and he often has to be left at home. He knows we are going long before the suitcases come out, and he paces and worries and whines and goes into a state of mild hysteria, old as he is. During the weeks of preparation, he was underfoot the whole time and made a damned nuisance of himself. He took to hiding in the truck, creeping in and trying to make himself look small. Labor Day approached, the day of truth when millions of kids would be back in school and tens of millions of parents would be off the highways. I was prepared to set out as soon after that as possible, and about that time Hurricane Donna was reported tromping her way out of the Caribbean in our direction. On Long Island's tip, we have had enough of that to be highly respectful. With a hurricane approaching, we prepare to stand a siege. Our little bay is fairly well protected, but not that well. As Donna crept forward to us, I filled the kerosene lamps, activated the hand pump to the well, and tied down everything movable. I have a 22-foot cabin boat, Fair Elaine. I battened her down and took her to the middle of the bay, put down a huge old-fashioned hook and anchor and half-inch chain, and moored her with long swinging. With that rig, she could ride 150-mile wind unless her bow pulled out. Donna sneaked on. We had brought out a battery radio for reports since the power would go off if Donna struck. But there was one added worry. Rocinante, sitting among the trees. In a waking nightmare, I saw a tree crash down on the truck and crush her like a bug. I placed her away from a possible direct fall, but that didn't mean that the whole top of the tree might not fly 50 feet through the air and smash her. By early morning, we knew by radio that we were going to get it, and by 10 o'clock, we had heard that the eye would pass over us and that it would reach us at 1:07, some exact time like that. Our bay was quiet, without a ripple, but the water was still dark, and the Fair Elaine rode daintily slack against her mooring. Our bay is better protected than most, so that many small craft came cruising in from mooring. I saw with fear that many of their owners did not know how to moor. Finally, 2 boats, pretty things, came in, one towing the other. A light anchor went down and they were left, the bow tethered to the stern of the other, and both within the swing of the ferry lane. I took a megaphone to the end of my pier and tried to protest against this foolishness, but the owners either did not hear, or did not know, or did not care. The wind struck on the moment we were told it would, and rippled the water like a black sheet. It hammered like a fist. The whole top of an oak tree crashed down, raising the cottage where we watched. The next gust stove one of the big windows in. I forced it back and drove wedges in top and bottom with a hand axe. Electric power and telephones went out with the first blast, as we knew they must, and 8-foot tides were predicted. We watched the wind rip at the earth and sea like a surging pack of terriers. The trees plunged and bent like grasses, and the whipped water raised a cream of foam. A boat broke loose and tubbinged up on the shore, and then another. Houses built in the benign spring and early summer took waves in their second-story windows. Our cottage is on a little hill 30 feet above sea level, but the rising tide washed over my high pier. As the wind changed directions, I moved Rocinante to keep her always to leeward of our big oaks. The fair Elaine rode daintily, swinging like a weather vane away from the changing wind. The boats which had been tethered to one another had fouled up by now, the towline under propeller and rudder and the two hulls bashing and scraping together. Another craft had dragged its anchor and gone ashore on a mud bank. Charley Dog has no nerves. Gunfire or thunder, explosions or high winds leave him utterly unconcerned. In the midst of the howling storm, he found a warm place under a table and went to sleep. The wind stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and although the waves continued out of rhythm, they were not wind-tattered, and the tide rose higher and higher. All the piers around our little bay had disappeared under water, and only their piles or handrails showed. The silence was like a rushing sound. The radio told us we were in the eye of Donna, and the still and frightening calm in the middle of the revolving storm. I don't know how long the calm lasted. It seemed a long time of waiting, and then another side struck us, the wind from the opposite direction. The fairy lane swung sweetly around and put her bow into the wind, but the two lash boats dragged anchor, swarmed down on Fairy Lane, and bracketed her. She was dragged fighting and protesting downwind and forced against a neighboring pier, and we could hear her hull crying against the oaken piles. The wind registered over 95 miles now. I found myself running, fighting the wind around the head of the bay toward the pier, where the boats were breaking up. I think my wife, for whom the Fairy Lane is named, ran after me, shouting orders for me to stop. The floor of the pier was 4 feet under water, the piles stuck up and offered handholds. I worked my way out a little bit, up to my breast pockets, the shore-driven wind slapping water in my mouth. My boat cried and whined against the piles and plunged like a frightened calf. Then I jumped and fumbled my way aboard her. For the first time in my life, I had a knife when I needed it. The bracketing wayward boats were pushing Elaine against the pier. I cut anchor line and tow line and kicked them free, and they blew ashore on the mud bank. But Elaine's anchor chain was intact, and that great old mud hook was still down, 100 pounds of iron with spear-shaped flukes, wide as a shovel. Elaine's engine is not always obedient, but this day it started at a touch. I hung on, standing on the deck, reaching inboard for the wheel and throttle, and clutch with my left hand. And that boat tried to help. I suppose she was that scared. I edged her out and worked up the anchor chain with my right hand. Under ordinary conditions, I can barely pull that anchor with both hands in a calm. But everything went right this time. I edged over the hook and it tipped up and freed its spades. Then I lifted it clear of the bottom and nosed into the wind and gave it throttle, and we headed into that goddamn wind and gained on it. It was as though we pushed our way through the thick porridge. 100 yards offshore, I let the hook go and plunged down and grabbed bottom, and the fair Elaine straightened and raised her bow and seemed to sigh with relief. Well, there I was, 100 yards offshore, with Donna baying over me like a pack of white-whiskered hounds. No skiff could possibly weather it for a minute. I saw a piece of branch go skidding by and simply jumped in after it. There was no danger. If I could keep my head up, I had to blow ashore, but I admit the half Wellington rubber boots I wore got pretty heavy. It couldn't have been more than 3 minutes before I grounded, and that other ferry lane, and a neighbor pulled me out. It was only then that I began to shake all over, but looking out and seeing our little boat riding well and safely was nice. I must have strained something pulling the anchor with one hand, because I needed a little help home. A tumbler of whiskey on the kitchen table was some help, too. I've tried since to raise that anchor with one hand, and I can't do it. The wind died quickly and left us to wreckage, power lines down, and no telephone for a week. But Rocinante was not damaged at all. That is the end of part 1. I will be reading parts 2 and 3 in halves because they are much bigger than parts 1 and 4. So, stay tuned for part 2 and then part 2.5 very shortly. I hope you enjoyed this and that it was relaxing for you. And I will see you again soon.